the day. First bill on the calendar for the day is House File 707. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 707, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government appropriating money for the Outdoor Heritage Fund. The second engrossment.
I call upon the author of the bill, Representative Gunther, to explain his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Legacy Omnibus Bill is a great bill. It provides funding for outdoor heritage, clean water, parks and trails, and arts and cultural heritage. We fund projects throughout the state of Minnesota, and it's geographically and politically balanced bill, and I will yield to Representative Lilly to discuss Article 1 at this time.
Call upon the member, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Gunther. I was honored enough to be put on the Lessard Sams by the Speaker and Speaker Dowd, and Denny McNamara was on it, former representative, and we served together and kind of went through a few proposals, as you can see. I'm not supposed to really hold up props, I guess, but you can see there's a few. We're in our 9th year of outdoor heritage funding, and we were to come up with a final product of about $103 million. And just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of, there was 44 requests that we had, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about the bonding committee, because there was over $317 million worth of requests that came before us, and we had to whittle that down to about $103 million. And there was about 12 to 15 meetings through the year. We've got a pretty strong staff that the state is blessed with. I don't know if you've had any opportunity to work with these folks, but Mark Johnson's the executive director, and Joe Pavelko, assistant director, and then Sandy Smith, of course. I always like to say doing the real work and getting it done behind the scene. But so we ended up with 33 projects that were in the Lessard package that the Citizens Council and the members, I mentioned Denny McNamara, and then there was, and myself, and there's 2 senators that served on the Legacy Committee, and then the citizens. And it's a pretty neat group of people around the state that really go through this and each project and assess them. But there's about 72,000 acres of wildlife habitat throughout Minnesota that's going to be restored and enhanced. Over 100 miles of shoreline. Just think about that, around that's going to be restored, enhanced, and protected. And keep in mind that this money is matched by other funds as well. So there's about $68 million. So with this $100 million, there's about almost $70 million that's going to be matched and with that money. There's 18 different groups in the end that got money, 5 local government groups, and then 11 non-governmental units. So we put together a proposal, and then that came before the body, and then kind of gone through the committee process. And I would imagine you've gotten some letters. I asked one of them to, there's been some tweaks that have been done to the bill that kind of, as it came through, and there is some, I just need to mention a bit of a heartburn in the council with some of the changes, and we can maybe discuss those later. But I think overall the bill's a good bill, and I'd like to thank Chair Gunther for allowing me to work with him on this. And anyways, I'm hoping to see the process through, and then maybe in conference committee it might come back a little closer to the council proposals. But I'm not sure. Do I yield back to you, Chair, or to Chair Torkelson? I'm not. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to Chair Torkelson. I believe he's with the clean water part of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Call upon the member, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Representative Gunther, and members. I'm presenting the Clean Water Fund portion of this bill. I'd like to just thank Brad Hagemeyer and Janelle Taylor for their help on the work on this bill, and of course, thanks to the chair and his fine staff also. They all did very good work. This portion of the bill does spend money over the biennium, so it's a significantly larger amount than the Lassard-Sams, which is a one-year appropriation. The appropriation for clean water is $100,497,000 in the first year and $111,114,000 in the second year, covering a variety of projects. Most of this funding is funneled through our various state agencies, the Department of Agriculture, PFA, the Pollution Control Agency, Department of Natural Resources, and most goes through the Board of Water and Soil Resources. We have, as much as possible, respected the outline given to us by the Clean Water Council, on which I serve as a non-voting member. But in order to accommodate a significant amount of funding for our soil and water conservation districts, $22 million, there was a fair amount of changes needed to be made in order to accommodate that amount of funding in this bill. And I'll be happy to stand for questions as we get into the discussion on the bill. I'm going to yield the floor to Representative Lehman.
Call
Thank
upon
you.
Representative Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Torkelson. I'm going to present the portion on the arts and culture heritage, and that is split up among many agencies, one of which is the Board of Arts. And actually, the legislature has allocated most of the Arts and Culture Heritage Fund money to the Board of Arts. And that turns out to be about 47% or $56 million. And the money goes to the Board of Arts for Arts Access Initiative, Arts Education, Art and Cultural Heritage, and then also to specific grants that are appropriated by the legislature. Some of the examples of these grants are $50,000 for statewide arts software, $500,000 for the Minnesota Friendship Garden Society for the China Garden in Palin Park, $750,000 for Dan Patch statues with the requirement that grant recipients must provide a funding match for at least 25% of the projects, $250,000 for a FANCA Arts grant program, and another example, $75,000 for a Hmong folk arts exhibit. And then we also had an allocation to the Department of Administration. And the Department of Administration simply acts as a fiscal agent for a number of other organizations. Legacy Committee allocated just over $20 million to the Department of Administration for various projects. These are directly appropriated by us, the legislature, and we use the Department of Admin as a pass-through. These appropriations fund projects throughout the whole state, from the Green Giant Museum in Blue Earth to the Como Zoo in St. Paul, to the Canoe Mobile program in the Boundary Waters. I was particularly excited to author and present funding for AMPERS. AMPERS is a collection of 18 radio stations around Minnesota that serve underserved populations in greater Minnesota. And it's not Minnesota Public Radio, it's independent community radio. And for instance, in my community of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, KAXZ is a community radio station that operates with a slim staff, but primarily with community volunteers. Anyone can come on KAXZ and talk about their issues, play their music, and it's true community building, I think, through the AMPERS program. And then finally, The Humanities Center operates many of their own programs, but they also oversee several other programs that are funded through them as pass-through. We allocated just a little over $5 million to the Humanities Center to fund programs and to use as a pass-through. So some of those were various children's museums around the state, one of which is in my own district again, so I have firsthand experience. It's the Children's Discovery Museum in Grand Rapids. And the museum is more than, these children's museums are more than simply go-to organizations. They actually reach out and with funding, oftentimes from Legacy, can provide transportation to bring school children into the museum with interactive exhibits and so on. And so the Legacy money oftentimes goes for those purposes. So with that, I would like now to, Mr. Speaker, yield to Representative Mary Murphy to cover the remaining arts and culture heritage funding.
I call upon the member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Lehman. And thank you, Representative Gunther. Thank you for following the guide that was drawn up in the 2009 and 10 legislative sessions. Thank you for following the excellent chairs that came before you. And thank you for telling the people of Minnesota that came to you for money for their dreams, that you had an open door, and that the funding that the committee has is in our trust for the guidelines that were established since the people of Minnesota voted in 2008 for the 3A's funding, for the outdoor heritage, for the clean water, for the parks and trails, and for arts and history and culture of Minnesota. And it's in the Constitution. So every action that you took, Representative Gunther, is to preserve our Constitution. And we're almost at the halfway line now, but we're not there yet. But people have heard that they can come and present their dreams and maybe get selected. And one of the ways, one of the outstanding ways was dividing the money up in various ways, as Representative Lehman already suggested, through the Arts Board. But the other way was through the Minnesota Historical Society that has kept our history since the very beginning of the territory, since the people first came, just to survive. There's many ways that the Historical Society has proven themselves. They have competitive grants. They have programs. And they extend all the way across the state in little tiny historical communities. And the big, huge historical center right down here is almost part of the Capitol complex. And the people of Minnesota have heard about the Historical Society, and they know that the money that's entrusted to the Historical Society to disperse to people of all ages in this state is going to be hard-earned and well spent. And this bill that this committee has designed has $12 million the first year and $14,750,000 the second year, for a total of $26,992 to fulfill Minnesotans' dreams of preserving art and culture throughout the state. It is a good thing. In this bill, we also, my heart, my dreams, we hit every person that goes into a library at some time or another through the funding in this bill. $5,250,000 will be spent in the 12 regional library systems that are housed out of the Department of Education. But the 12 regional library systems work with the arts commissions across the state. And they develop programming in every part of the state where there's a library or a theater or a sidewalk during a summer celebration, to reach out and get programming, or to bring an author, or to bring an artist, or, as the Two Harbors Library had a couple years ago, to bring somebody up, an artist, or a person that was impersonating Maud Lovelace to Two Harbors, and they had an afternoon tea, and there were 12 guests. But the little girls that came were dressed in the finery of the days, of the early days of this century. And the stories we had, and the tea was from a teacup. And it wasn't so great, but the sorbet that we had to accompany the tea was just what those little girls in white gloves dreamed of. Minnesota authors travel the state with the funding that they receive from their little portion from the library systems. And the libraries compete within their system for who's going to get what kind of programming, or who's got an idea. The Minnesota Opera came to Hermantown as part of their regional tour. And on Halloween one Saturday, 2 years ago, the opera played at the Duluth Arena, at the auditorium in Duluth, and the place was full for 4 hours. People that had worked with the schools and the Minnesota Opera came, and knew people that had never been able to see an opera before, or never thought they would want to go see an opera. But their kids had come in touch at the libraries, and their kids had come in touch with the idea of the opera through their music lessons when the opera people came to visit their schools, as part of the outreach of the Arts and Cultural Fund and the Library Fund. They were so happy. And there were people dressed as you think you should be dressed to go to the opera. And there were people in flannel and wool shirts and everything in between. But it didn't matter how they were dressed because they were experiencing something together. And that's what the arts and cultural funding does. But I digress. We must go on. The Minnesota Zoo receives from this bill about $3,625,000. And the Indians Affairs Council for immersion programs and for continuing to ensure that the language of the Dakota and Ojibwe will be passed down to the new generations before the elders have passed on. And we can learn everything we can from the elders to preserve the language. The Department of Agriculture receives $1 million for county fair activities, not the showcases that they've always do, but enhancing art at the county fair. Can you imagine being a young artist and painting a picture that gets a blue ribbon at the county fair, and then they encourage that person to take it to the state fair? Representative Torkelson brought this idea to us several years ago, and it's had so much success and renewed the hope of the county fair boards that they had to generate new ideas at their county fairs. And you know how important county fairs are to culture. It is so important. You know what happened, and I'm going to tell you the biggest secret that I should be embarrassed to tell the House of Representatives. But a lot of you don't know some things about my past. But it was at the county fair, on the Ferris wheel, that I received my first kiss. From a boy that I had met on the fairway. From Proctor, not even from Hermantown. I don't want to tell you any more. But it's part of the culture of America. How many of you have gone to the county fair and ridden a ride at the county fair after you've shown your horse or shown your chicken or shown your rabbit or done your 4-H project? How many of you have met a boy from across the way and maybe rode the merry-go-round or the Ferris wheel? I bet you did too. Anyway, this is a good bill, Representative Gunther, and I don't want to forget the $9,000 that we have to the Legislative Coordinating Committee to improve the website. But it's in there, and it's part of our culture. And think of the fair and the ties to the legacy bill when you go this summer, or when you show your jam, or you make a cookie, or bring your quilt. The fair is where it's all about. It's culture. I yield to Representative Gunther, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker.
The member for Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Murphy. I have the Parks and Trails part. The Parks and Trails are 40% Met Council, 40% Department of Natural Resources, and 20% rural. Don't think rural's getting shortchanged that much because many of the DNR parks are in greater Minnesota. This 40-40-20 proposition is being potentially changed next year. We had them together not too long ago, and they all seem rather happy with the way it's working. So I think that's probably the way it'll continue. But I'd also like to thank all the people that presented this bill. I think we had experts. We had somebody from Lessard Sam, somebody from the Clean Water Council, and someone that was a former chairman and my vice chair. And I think they did a wonderful job. But we had a great committee. Everybody contributed. And Representative Thiessen was concerned about the cultural diversity of our state and wanted to make sure they were included. And I want to let him know that we have the Chinese Gardens in Phelan Park. Representative Baker had Kajug, Fanka, and Representative Moran had Hmong Folk Art Exhibit, and she also had Rondo Commemorative Plaza. The Somali Museum was bought by Representative Omar, and Representative Clark, the Indian Affairs Council, had, as was mentioned, the Dakota and Ojibwe language programs. These are truly the legacy of not only the oldest people in Minnesota, but also the newest people. And I think this bill does a great deal of bringing all cultures and legacy together in Minnesota. And I'd like to this time thank Janelle Taylor, Brad Hagemeyer, Mary Mullen, John Waltz, Rebecca Mead, and Jeremy Winstead, and Callie Lehman for all the help they gave our committee and the help they did in guiding me my first time as a chairman of the Legacy Committee. So with that, we're here to answer any questions you have and address the amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Green moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment, and the amendment is coded A18.
I call upon the member from Monoman, Representative Green, to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few years ago, we put on to the legacy amendment that there had to be, because of some legislative audit reports, we made some changes clarifying some of the language. There was still one thing left to clarify, and it had to do with some of the reporting requirements. And so the language that you have before you is language from the legislative auditor that makes those clarifications. So if there's any questions, I'll answer them.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Green. I lost you. Where'd you go? Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, we're just trying to figure out what it means exactly, and I'm not necessarily against it, and people outside these walls and that work in some of these funds are just trying to figure out what it is, and they're very familiar with the OLA, and they're not necessarily like totally against it because this plant issue and others are just kind of an ongoing concern. So I think you have good intent. They're trying to figure out how they're going to implement it. So I'm not going to speak against it. It's just we're not sure you're quite there yet. But maybe through conference committee you can get it there and get it over the goal line and achieve a goal that's workable for everybody. But that the OLA report was certainly interesting, and it's definitely a noble cause. That where everybody's interested in and making sure that money's going correctly and following the right process. But it's kind of an ongoing debate. But thank you for bringing it forward. And I just, I'm not speaking against it. Just trying to, I hope we can get it there, maybe in conference and where it needs to be. Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The language is just clarification, and the language came about because there was just a few other issues, and we heard from the DNR and also from Minnesota Management and Budget that they wanted some clarification on the language. And so that's what this is. It's just clarification on the language of how you have to document the money that you get, and that the documentation has to be in order according to law.
Further discussion to the amendment? Member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think Representative Lundy put it very clearly. I think as I view this bill, I think this is a green vote. Please vote green.
Further discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the A18 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Motions prevail and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Green moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment, as amended, and the amendment is coded A19.
I call upon the member of the amendment, Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A19 amendment is an issue that was brought to me by some of the northern counties. We have counties in our area that are, and some of them are excess of 80%, 75, 80% that are now publicly owned. And what this does is this just simply allows for counties, if they choose, to file a no net gain policy with the DNR. And if they do choose to file that, then if there is land that is desirable to have within those counties, then the counties are able to negotiate to sell off other parcels so that they don't realize any kind of a loss within that exchange. And it's a good vote, and I ask for a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if Representative Green would yield to a few questions.
He will yield. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Green, if you could explain to me how this might work. I'm looking at the amendment in the sections of line 1.13 through 1.17. It says that if they're going to acquire land, that there can be no net gain of land. And then it says that the land must be sold, must be of substantially equal value. So if you can't grow the acreage, that means you're really swapping land that's the same value. What if you have maybe a larger parcel, the land is not valued at as much money? Are you not able to actually trade the land for land that works better for the state? Or do you have to only trade the specific number of acres and then you can't trade it if it's not worth the same amount of money? I'm just trying to figure out how this is going to actually work in practice. I don't think, based on the language, that it really does work.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, yeah, I think it will work. If you look at the statute 94.343, I do not have it in front of me, but it basically spells out that if the acreage is over 100 acres, then it has to be within 10%. If it's under that, it has to be within 20%. But basically what this is there are parcels of land that have been deemed as very valuable and some not so valuable. But when you go to resell them, in the way of environment, when you go to sell them, they could have equal value. But what this simply says is that a county has the option, if they choose, they don't have to accept it, but if they choose, they have the option to say, for instance, Clearwater County has 35 to 37% non-taxable land. They're a very poor county, and they might say, we just can't afford to lose any more of our tax base, so we want to file this. Therefore, if the state or the DNR comes in and says, we really would like to purchase this very valuable piece of land, the county can say, okay, you have 80 acres here, 40 acres here, and so we want to be made whole in this transaction so we don't lose our tax base.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if Representative Green would yield to another question.
He will yield.
Thank you. Representative Green, can you then explain to me about the appraisal value that's also in this language? It says that the land may not be sold for less than the appraisal value, and then it goes on to say that it can be for less. So whose appraisal? What if there's more than one appraisal? And how do you determine how that works and what the value then would supposed to be to confirm you're in compliance with the other requirements?
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I think you're talking semantics here, because no matter where you go, if you're going to purchase land or sell land, you need an appraisal. If you're not happy with the appraisal, you can certainly ask for another one. But right now, these appraisals are being done. Not only being done just as a general appraisal, but in the counties, they're also being done on any value that timber might have or any value that the minerals might have. So I don't think that the appraisal is an issue. I think that those will obviously be done, or you wouldn't know the value of the land.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Green, the question is, what about when there's two? You just stated that sometimes you get an appraisal and you disagree with it, and so then there's a second one done. My question is then, how do you determine which appraisal you're going to go based on to determine if you can be in compliance with this section of the bill?
Are you asking the member to yield?
I am, Mr. Speaker, if Representative Green would yield.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative, it's it's no different than any other land transaction. So if you look at the appraisal, and you can tell if the appraisal is within a certain area that you think is justified, and I would assume that because the county has the authority, if they're going to be there, they would be in those negotiations, and the negotiations would then be held between the state and the county to decide which appraisal they would go with.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just one final question for Representative Green, and I won't need to stand up again after this. Most transactions don't have something in law that states that it must not be sold for 75%, less than 75% of the appraised value. So my question is then, how can you confirm that they're in compliance with this statute when there's two appraisals and there may be a significant difference in the values based on the appraisals?
Are you asking the member to yield?
I am, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Green would yield.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say the 75% was placed in there because in the past we have had more than just a few incidences where the state has put land up for sale when they were required to put land up for sale. And the value of the property may have been a certain amount, but because, for instance, it didn't have access, someone might not have been able to, willing to pay that appraised value by the time they got all the amenities in there that they needed. I don't really think this is going to be an issue. It's just a protection so that if there is a piece of land that comes up that the state agrees to sell in exchange, that there would be an option for some improvements on that land to get it up to a saleable value.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, the A19 amendment, we've seen provisions relating to no net gain of counties in the past. And I think we're getting into some policy here that turns into an anti-public lands section. We know that counties have done this. What this does is it kicks into the Natural Resources Department and dollars that are being appropriated here. I think it's an important issue, and I would ask for a roll call vote.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Green, I certainly respect you on this one as well, or that I realize there's some concerns out in greater Minnesota, some of the counties that you mentioned. And the no net gain it's an interesting concept, and I certainly understand where many counties are at full capacity. But members, keep in mind that you know, when they go to these counties now for these efforts, whether it's a wildlife management area or a scenic and natural area, they're working with these, working with the counties. You know, they just don't like show up and just like, is my understanding, they're just not, you know, buying it without working with the locals, because they realize that the problems that would be. And so what happens is, you know, some of the counties, you know, we've got 87 of them in Minnesota, and honestly, if I think if a county was at their limit and they said, hey, knock it off, which I think your county is, it sounds like they are, but I don't think they've passed a resolution or whatever to send it to the DNR to, no mas, no more. I'm not familiar with one. Maybe there is one, and I'm sorry if I'm giving misinformation, and maybe I saw Representative Green's hand go up, and maybe he can clarify. But I don't know of a single county, and even in your district, that said, hey, we don't want any more. But if they did, and this is an option they could do, if they said, hey, let's not do any more, let's go, they would go to the DNR, and I'm certain the DNR, granted it wouldn't be a law that they'd have to, a law that we had passed or we had done, but they would respect that, I would think. From everything I've heard, I think they would have a hard time buying the land and working on projects that certainly the locals said, no way, no how. That's my understanding. I kind of did a little bit of homework on this because it's a big issue, folks that don't necessarily pay attention to these issues. Anyways, that's kind of it. I'm curious to hear what he says, but I don't think this one is better. And if a county really does indeed want out, I would wish they'd pass one of these resolutions and to see what happened. And then there's a lot of, as Representative Wagenia says, there's a lot of prairie out in western Minnesota maybe we could work on, or other areas. So that's just my thoughts, but thank you.
Member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Green yield for a question, please? A couple of questions.
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Representative Green, if someone had in their estate land being given to the state of Minnesota upon their death, under this, would the state of Minnesota be able to accept land given them in an estate?
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Erdahl, if you read the language, yes, it would. This amendment deals with specifically land that is purchased by the state. So if they chose to donate it to the state, yes, they could.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's somewhat reassuring to me, although I wonder how the no net gain figures in with that. But I'll accept that. The other question is, are there circumstances under this bill then when a willing seller would not be able to sell their land to the state of Minnesota if they so chose?
Representative Green.
Thank you for that question, Representative Erdahl. That question comes up quite a bit. And there's always the statements that a willing buyer and a willing seller. The question becomes, how much should the state be buying? And this, I'll address Representative Lilly's concerns here as well. Yes, there are counties that have filed no net gain, and yes, they do try to push back. But when they do try to push back, they come up against the full force of the state and its money. And that's very difficult to overcome. And if you looked through the recommendations from the Lessard-Sams Council even this year, you'll see many recommended acquisitions in there that there's always the question, has county approval been sought? Many of them say no. And so there is that issue. And I can take you up north sometime if you want, and I'll take you to my county commissioners, and you can get their take on this and what it means to them to see this land being sold. And they don't have the money to fight back. And they're not always asked whether or not they are willing to sell it. So the question becomes to Representative Erdahl is, how much does the state want? I mean, and the other issue, you talked about the land down south. Well, the land up north is being purchased more often because it's cheaper. And if some of our counties could say we no longer wish to sell any more land and take it off the tax rolls, you'll have more money to buy the land that you wanted down south.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to clarify then, the answer is yes, there are circumstances under which a willing seller would be prohibited to sell.
Representative Green.
A willing seller will always be able to sell his land, Mr. Speaker. A willing seller will always be able to sell his land, Representative Erdahl. The question is, who should be buying it?
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Green, I'm not going to speak against your amendment or ask anybody to vote against it, but just some of my concerns is just setting artificial limits from the legislature and what you can and should sell your land, whether it's percentages or dollars or anything else. And then some of these county commissions or county commissioners, county government are set up with all farmers and sometimes no farmers, and they might have a completely different opinion on whether they want to gain land or not, depending on the county. And the willing seller does bother me if they don't have enough land to sell in the counties, and so there's just a number of things in here. I would ask that if this does pass and it goes to conference committee, that you put in a clause that says this only applies to anywhere north of Highway 2, like that last one we did, I can't remember, Ways and Means or whatever, because in the south part of the state, if we bought all of the land plus 25% more, we wouldn't get back a fraction of what we've lost. And another thing is that we talk about the DNR coming in and outbidding some of these places, or Pheasants Forever or such. In my area, businessmen are getting together and outbidding others, but that's the free market. Number of businessmen to get together and sometimes outbid the neighbor. But that, again, is a free market. So I just wish this applied to the counties that you're attending it to that really have the problem with a gross overlimit of land.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly who it applies to, Representative Cornish. Your counties don't have to accept this. And the county board, no matter who they're made up of, are elected by the people in that county. And so they do represent the people in that county. And so the issue here is, you know, you talk about the free market. If in one instance we had actually south of Highway 2 just a little bit, where there was a lake property up for sale, and there was an offer for the asking price. And the DNR actually came in and upped the bid by, I think it was $30,000. I'm not going to swear to that, but it was a great deal of money, and outbid the private person for that lot. So it does happen, and so now it's not a free market. Now you have the state using your money to bid against you on a piece of property that you want.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I am going to support this bill. I think it takes a bit of a novel approach to a problem or a situation that we've had in many areas for a number of years. Counties have tried to enact no net loss provisions, but they seem to run into this willing seller and willing buyer situation, and it's difficult to go up against that. So what this one does is say, if you're going to buy it, you're going to have to divest someplace else to keep your net number of acreage at zero. And just to comment to Representative Lilly that all these agencies work with the counties, and they won't buy it if the county doesn't want them to. Back when I was a commissioner, this is 10 years ago or so, a piece of ground came up, a good piece of farmland, and this was Fish and Wildlife. It wasn't DNR, so it doesn't exactly amount to the same here, but we opposed the sale. It came down all the way here to the Land Exchange Board. I came down to the Capitol to testify against the sale, and we were overruled by the governor and whoever else was on that board. And in that case, the county was against the sale, but it went through anyway because the Land Exchange Board down here overruled the county in that situation. So it is a problem in a lot of counties. They feel that enough is enough, and this amendment tries to go at it by saying if you're going to buy some additional land, you're going to have to get rid of some other place. So it's a kind of a novel approach, and I like that idea, and I would support this amendment.
Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it was brought to my attention that there are some counties, so I was wrong. So there's apparently around the state maybe 8 counties, and maybe they are yours, that have made their feelings known But even still, after some of that, some of these counties, like Chair Cornish mentioned, folks will come and say, hey, I want to sell my stuff. And so then it does get tricky, because you could have a great parcel that could be a treasure for the state, and we might miss an opportunity. But so there is that ongoing battle. I'm hoping that we can count on you. I like that you like the local, sorry to go off for a second, but maybe we can count you on some of this preemption stuff next week, since you like local control. Probably not funny. But anyways, but I think that, so you get into the battle of owners' rights in the counties, and I appreciate Chair Anderson's comments, and I was wrong about there are some counties that we've bought in, or that have opted out.
The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, the state of Minnesota and other governments already own 25% of the state of Minnesota. 25%, and marching forward with each and every one of these bills that comes through this body. Now that's over 8 million acres of land the government has. The question is, how many acres do they need? Or is it never going to end? Is there just an insatiable appetite for the government to own more and more of the state of Minnesota? And members, this amendment doesn't say that the government can't buy more land. It says if the government buys land, it needs to sell an equal amount in those jurisdictions, so that we don't continue to have more and more of the ownership accumulated in the ownership of government. Well, we're certainly on a march to do that. There's 9,000 or 10,000 acres each year in this bill. I'm still trying to come up with the numbers, because Chair Gunther said that that number actually went down from where it was. But members, so far since 2009, which I believe was the first year that legacy money was appropriated from the 2008 constitutional amendment, we have purchased nearly 86,000 acres of state land with the people's money at a cost of $37 million. We've also put into easement 34,800 acres of land at a cost of $27 million. And members, if we continue on the pace we're on, by the time the legacy amendment expires in 2034, we will have purchased over nearly 239,000 acres of state land with legacy money at a cost of nearly $1 billion. So members, that's the course we're on. And to suggest that, well, let's just trust that the DNR is going to, listen to these counties up north. Well, Representative, I've been in these counties up north, and maybe many others in this body have been too. And it's happening in some counties and areas and townships and counties down south as well. But a large percentage of those areas are occupied by government ownership of land. What that means is that the people who live there have to pay higher property taxes. Now we have PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, which those same people who live near there have to contribute to the money that's used to pay PILT, as does every Minnesotan that pays taxes, have to contribute to the money that's used to pay for PILT. But PILT does not accurately and in many times completely compensate the cost to the township, the school, the city, or the county. And so people who live in those areas are at a property tax disadvantage with every additional parcel of land that is purchased. And Representative Green's amendment simply says, let's give that county the ability to decide if they want to opt in and out, or in or maybe they want to be out after 10 years, or maybe back in, or maybe in for a long time if 80 or 90% of their county is owned by government, which we've got counties that are like that in northern Minnesota now. And the people are suffocating from the property taxes. So members, Representative Green's amendment, I think, is a good first move at addressing the problem. And members, those of you that have been speaking in opposition to this, I have not heard of another idea from you to counter this issue. I've been talking about it for 10 years. The Office of the Legislative Auditor offered an audit back in 2011 or 12 that said we can't even afford to properly pay for and manage the land that the state owns now. That was 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. And we're continuing on the march to buying more and more and more and more. So until I hear a better idea from someone who may have stood up on the floor before me to talk about this, this is the best idea I've heard to stem that and actually give the local people the ability to not only express their situation and express themselves and their taxpayers' concerns, but to actually take action and bring an element of control over a DNR that is bringing a purse along that has more money in it than anyone in that area could ever accumulate. So members, that's the issue we're talking about. I'd certainly very much encourage a green vote on Representative Green's amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I rise to support Representative Green, and I want to thank you. And many of you know, and some of you don't, but Representative Daniels and I, brother and sister, grew up in Bagley, grew up in the very area that Representative Green's been talking about. And we go back, we still have classmates and friends and family that live back there. And let me just tell you their story, because that's not really been told. They're farmers, they're loggers, they're hardworking people. Clearwater County and Monoman County go back and forth throughout the last few decades as who's the poorest county in the state. You're talking about a marginal living, a difficult living. They work really hard all day long. They work during the day, and then maybe they farm a little bit during the day, and then they have a painting business at night, and they have 2 or 3 things that they're trying to do just to survive. They work really hard. And you know what this does? In Clearwater County alone, as Representative Green just said, 37% of the county is owned by the state. Farmers are telling me that they have no more land that they can lease or buy or anything else so that they can farm and they can hay. They don't have enough hay to feed their animals. There's no more land left that they can log because the state owns it all. It gobbled all up. Mr. Merschman let me know, who's been there for decades, he's been there generations, that, you know, there was a great piece of land that was adjacent to him he wanted to buy. And he talked to the owner and thought, well, yeah, we've got a great piece of land here. We'll decide on a price. Then the DNR came in and outbid him by double. And that's what's happening all over greater Minnesota. And Beltrami County is even worse. And Representative Green, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's close to 80% of Beltrami County up by Bemidji, Red Lake Indian Reservation up in there. And that was just a stone's throw from where I grew up. I grew up right on Highway 2. We had a mile of Highway 2 and a half a mile deep. I grew up on a beautiful little hobby farm, and I told my dad, don't you ever call this a hobby because it's too much work, because we had 3 other businesses at the same time. But we worked hard, and that's what people have to do up there. And when the state comes in and buys land and buys and buys and buys and buys and outbids everybody, they can't make a living. That's what this amendment is about. They can't make a living, and it's not fair. So I ask you, please, stand with those of us in greater Minnesota. Give us a fair shot. Please, give us a fair shot. Let the farmer be able to buy land or lease land to be able to feed his animals. Let the logger go out and make a living. I'm asking you, please, vote with Representative Green.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd like to make 4 quick points in speaking for the Green Amendment. First of all, members, the state of Minnesota is one of the largest landowners in the country. We own well over 8 million acres of land. That's way more money than even the richest individuals in the country own. It's something like the charts I've seen, like the third or fourth largest entity in the country in terms of land ownership. We are a very large landowner, far beyond what almost any other state owns. Just, maybe second or third to the federal government. Secondly, members, this is a very narrowly crafted amendment. This doesn't prohibit the purchase of new land by MnDOT. It doesn't prohibit the purchase of new land by the University of Minnesota or the Minnesota State College and University System. Doesn't prohibit the purchase of more land by the Department of Administration. It's just talking about the DNR. And to Representative Erdahl's question, it's even a little bit more narrowly crafted than that. If you look at lines 10 through 11, it is only about, if you look at the language, land that was acquired in fee with money appropriated from the Outdoor Heritage Fund. So this has nothing to do with land that might be given to the state in someone's will or estate or something like that. This is only about land acquired in fee with money appropriated from the Outdoor Heritage Fund. This is a narrowly crafted amendment. Thirdly, members, counties obviously can say no. I know there's a great deal of variability around the state between what percentage of the county is owned, especially if you go up north as opposed to down south. I know down in southern Minnesota, there are counties that would like the state to buy more land for pheasant hunting or wildlife management areas or whatever. If that's something that is popular in that area, I can't imagine that the county board is going to take a stand against it and pass a no net gain sort of resolution like this. So we're going to allow the local people to vote on this and have some voice, and if they want more land in the county, they'll have the opportunity to act in such a way that they have a chance of getting that. Finally, members, even if a county passes a no net gain resolution, if the DNR sees some really great piece of land that they really think we ought to own because of its natural resource value or beauty, they can still acquire that land. They just have to dispose of other land within the county. So members, this is a narrowly crafted amendment, particularly up in northern Minnesota. There are issues of economic development just because the state owns so much land. Members, we are already one of the very largest landowners in the country. Let's put a few brakes on this. Vote for the Green Amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Uglum.
Representative Green, obviously this is something that we've talked about and debated quite a bit in committee and everything else, but I just have a couple technical questions. On line 12 of the bill, we talk about who they can sell to, the DNR. Could you define entity for me? What's your intent on that term?
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that might be a business, some other entity. In fact, Representative Uglum, that could even be any entity, including maybe a sportsman's club, but they would have to pay taxes on the land instead of either putting it into nonprofit status or turning it back over to the DNR, which many times they do.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the representative yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Uglum.
Would that, Representative Green, would that entity, could that include, for instance, a nonprofit like a church, or could it even include another government entity?
Representative Green.
Mr. Speaker, I guess the other government entities would have to have gone and applied for outdoor heritage funds before that would affect them, as would a church. And I don't know that that's really going to be the case.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to bring up a few items like that. Thank you.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had a long debate on this. I think good points have been made on both sides. And one of the things I'd like to do now is bring up the fact that this was put in the Constitution. We might not like it, but the people of the state voted for this amendment, and part of that was understood to be acquiring land. So the way it was worded was to preserve, restore, and protect our land. I would ask the DNR or any other state agency that's looking at acquiring land in the future to take Representative O'Neill, Representative Green, and other people's words into consideration and look at land in other parts of the state. Let's avoid this conflict by going to places where people do want to sell land for pheasant hunting or protecting wildlife or scientific and natural areas, whatever it would be. So I would encourage the representatives from the DNR to take that into consideration before we spend any more, whether it's outdoor heritage money or any other money, to make sure that we're buying it where it will do the people of the state some good and will be less, troublesome for people that live in those counties. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
Further discussion to the amendment? Further discussion? Seeing none and a roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 74 ayes and 55 noes, the A19 amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A24.
Call upon the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, this is a very important amendment, and I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, in the tax bill, we had a discussion, Representative Lilly, Representative Drazkowski, myself, about provision, which we might as well refer to as the poison pill provision that was in the tax bill relating to outdoor heritage. And that said, if the trust plan or trust scheme, the trust plan that was developed was found to be void, then there would be no acquisition allowed. And so this amendment references that provision in the tax bill and nullifies that nullification. So it's a little hard to follow it, but members and Minnesotans watching at home, I think often there are challenges where these issues, and we heard a little bit of this on the previous amendment, these issues are discussed as black and white issues. No acquisition or all acquisition. So I dug out the pesky Constitution, which we are supposed to uphold, and it said that 33% of the receipts shall be deposited in the Outdoor Heritage Fund and may be spent only to restore, protect, and enhance wetlands, prairies, forest, and habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. It doesn't say acquire, it says protect. And protect can be something other than acquire, But it also doesn't say protect does not mean acquire. Protect may mean acquire or other types of protection. And so the provision that was in the tax bill that this amendment is trying to undo would lock in and void the vote of the people who said that the state may acquire land and fee. It doesn't say only acquire land and fee. It says the state may acquire land and fee. Of most of the things we vote on, everybody thinks that each amendment they have is the most important. This is a big deal, and that's why I asked for the roll call on it. It's hard with our rules to deal with something in a 400-plus page bill if you're not on those committees. So this amendment in this bill is the only tool we have to go back and try to correct that error. Now, Representative Drazkowski, you know I don't agree with all acquisitions, that it's only acquisition. But I believe there are some acquisitions that should be allowed. And you're taking a heavy hammer here in the tax bill. And I would ask for support for this amendment to undo that error.
Discussion to the A24 amendment. Member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen. Members, I encourage a no vote on this amendment. We did have discussion during the tax bill debate. And members, this was put in the bill originally to provide a backstop, a pause, if you will, should the law become determined to be unconstitutional by court, so that there was recourse for not only the legislature but the people of Minnesota at that point to decide what they want to do in terms of continued land purchases with the money in the face of the fact that the people did not vote for a tax increase when they voted for the constitutional amendment. And members, that's the issue here. This is a fundamental cost to this approach of this use of legacy money. And Representative Hansen, it's up to the legislature to determine what restore, protect, and enhance mean. And then after they determine that, and that's something that develops over time, it is developing. There was initially, I know at least for one biennium in session law, a definition of what protect meant. And we can define that over time. But the Constitution doesn't say what each of those definitions are, and that's up to this body and other bodies after us to determine. So, members, this is the backstop so that down the road, if indeed, and again, the bill as written that passed last week, I believe, and many others believe, is very much constitutional. We developed it and crafted it in a way that we're certain it's constitutional. But a future judge could offer otherwise. And so we included in the bill that if indeed that happens, there will be a pause. And the state of Minnesota will pause its purchases of land with this legacy money until that legislature acting at that time or a future one decides otherwise. So members, there is a legacy bill. As a matter of fact, we're debating one right now that's debated every biennium. Actually, I think there's one every year of some sort. That in that discussion, should that happen, should that pause be enacted at the time, there will be the opportunity then for that legislature to decide what they're going to do. They could decide for the pause to remain in effect, or they could take the pause off and reestablish the future direction around this issue. And the issue is an important one. It's one where property tax payers in Minnesota are being further and further and further burdened by more and more land purchases. And so we wrote into the bill, which is now part of the Omnibus tax bill, a requirement that said when there are more land purchases in the future, that legacy money is used to pay for the property taxes in a precise and adequate manner. And that's what we're protecting here, is we are protecting the ability for us to make certain that all of the costs associated with land purchases, and especially this fundamental one, the one that the citizens didn't vote for. They didn't vote for a property tax increase, but members, every time we buy a parcel of land, they're getting one. So that's what this is here to protect. And members, I'd encourage a no vote on the Hansen amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A24 amendment. Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also will encourage a red vote. There's already been a bill passed, and this is being in conflict with that in the tax bill. And I think we have to honor that. So I would urge everybody to vote red, please.
Further discussion. Further discussion. Seeing none, and a roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 51 ayes and 76 nays, the A24 amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Wagenius moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A27.
I call upon the member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius, to your amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This bill took $6.5 million away from projects recommended by the Clean Water Council that would have protected drinking water. One of the specific things that would have been done with this money is to work with local communities to develop source water protection plans for municipal drinking water wells. Currently in Minnesota, there are 960 community public water wells in Minnesota. 492 wells have protection plans. That means 468 don't have plans. Most of The wells that I am talking about would be small wells in small communities in outstate Minnesota. It turns out that because there's a cancellation of $257,000 on the Clean Water Fund bottom line, so there's a cancellation, we have that much money to spend. This amendment gives the money to the Department of Health, so the department will be able to work with 20 communities and develop source water protection plans. Not very many. 448 communities still won't have source water protection plans. And at the rate we're going, it's going to take 23 years for all communities to have source water protection plans. I expect there are a lot of communities that would like you to restore the $6.5 million because source water protection plans are not the only thing that needs to be done to protect drinking water. The Minnesota Department of Health has determined that over 1.2 million acres of land should be in municipal wellhead protection zones. Of that, 350,000 acres are at particular risk because of their geology. The Department of Health reports to us that only 2.7% of these lands are now protected. It's taken several years for us to get to the 2.7%. So at this rate, I calculate that it'll take 300 years for source water to be protected across the state of Minnesota. And that's not all. The Department of Health has not produced a source water protection plan for our rivers. I know, for example, that 1 million people drink the Mississippi River water from St. Cloud, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and lots of suburbs. So there's much work that needs to be done to protect drinking water. In my judgment, the Clean Water Council didn't recommend enough to protect drinking water, and this bill takes away $6.5 million of what they did recommend. The amendment I have before you is no cure, but it will help 20 outstate Minnesota communities and should get a green vote.
Discussion to the 827 amendment. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Wagenius, for bringing this amendment forward. I would say finders keepers. You found some money on the bottom line. This restores some of the recommended funding. I'm happy to support your amendment, but I think you're doing a bit of an exaggeration about money moving away from clean water work. The $3.5 million that was targeted for wellhead drinking water protection, those projects can actually be funded with CREP money. And we have significant increase in CREP money in the LCCMR bill, so those projects can still be funded with those funds. And I would hope that you would recognize that, Representative Wagenius, but I do ask for a green vote on your amendment.
Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I want to thank Representative Wagenius for bringing this amendment forward. It's been something that she has brought to my attention all the way through the committee period since we didn't have enough money there. And in conference committee, I plan on enhancing this money as much as I possibly can. Please vote green.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Gunther. Representative Torkelson, when I counted up the money that wasn't going to drinking water protection in general, I counted it to be $8.8 million. But I checked with our fiscal analyst, Brad Hagemeyer, and he had done that same calculation. He came up with 6.49 or something very close to that. And so the number I'm reporting to you on the floor is the one that came from our fiscal analyst. So that's one thing. Second thing, you tell us that CREP will help with drinking water. The plan that they have said they will only spend 5% of that money on drinking water. I truly wish it were more, but that's the plan they're putting forth.
Further discussion to the 827 amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adoption of the 827 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A28.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe there's a second amendment.
There is, Representative Hansen. There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A33.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Gunther, this amendment, the secondary amendment, the A33, I would like to just get the other amendment into the shape that I intended, and so I'm asking just for a yes vote to get this into the form I would like. I don't know if you heard me on that, Representative Gunther, but I'd like the A33 to get the A28 into the form that I would like.
Discussion to the amendment to the amendment. Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting the amendment to the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Representative Hansen, to your amended amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll try to win over that lonely no that I heard. The A28 as amended, and during the last amendment there was discussion about the Clean Water Fund having some money on the bottom line. Inflow infiltration is an important issue in many districts, and with the secondary amendment, we focus that on areas where there's a high susceptibility to groundwater contamination. So this would be $500,000 just for grants to help out with cost share, just like we do cost share for farmers. This would be for homeowners where they've got leaking pipe, where that line that goes from the public pipe to the house could leak and contaminate groundwater. And with the secondary amendment, it's designed to make sure that we are those areas where there's a high susceptibility to groundwater contamination.
Discussion to the A28 amendment. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. I would speak against A28 not because it's a bad idea, but because it violates the 5% bottom line numbers that we need to preserve.
Further discussion, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for a roll call then.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hansen, for offering this amendment. This is an amendment that not everybody may know about, but it does affect a lot of areas in the state, one of which is the district I represent. And it's a good environmental amendment, too. When you have groundwater seeping into the sanitary sewer lines, then oftentimes if there's too much wastewater, that can get discharged, in my community's case, into the Mississippi River, which we drink from. When I was on the city council in Golden Valley, we passed a program requiring homeowners who sell their houses to get their sewer lines inspected, and if there are any cracks in there, then they have to get them repaired. That can be a pretty expensive process to do. We had a program like this in the Legacy Place, in the Legacy Bill 3 or 4 years ago, and I know Representative Hansen was instrumental in getting that passed, so thank you for your work on that. Many people in my community took advantage of that program, and I know that they would do so again if this amendment passed, and I know it should. As far as the 5% set aside, I know we've gone under 5% many times in the past. There is sufficient funding there, and I think we should support this amendment, which benefits so many people around the state and has such an important positive environmental effect and improves the quality of our water, which is what the Legacy Amendment was passed in part to do. So I encourage everyone to vote yes.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call being, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge a green vote on this bill, on this amendment.
Discussion. Roll call being requested. Clerk will take the roll on the amendment as amended. Clerk will close the roll. There being 121 ayes and 9 noes, the 828 amendment as amended is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Hanson moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A29.
I call upon the member from Dakota to his amendment. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gunther, on that previous amendment. I also want to thank Representative Freiberg. I'm going to have him speak on more of my amendments. It seems that he's able to turn the tide and get them passed. So this amendment relates to something we've talked about often here, but we haven't funded. And I don't know if Representative Hamilton is on the floor, but in the legacy bill, we don't give a huge portion of the funds to the Department of Agriculture. But we did once. We did once in 2009, Representative Murphy. In 2009, we gave $2 million we appropriated, I don't want to say gave, we appropriated money to the Department of Agriculture to work on emerald ash borer. And so I think this amendment is really important. It gives an opportunity, again, off the bottom line in the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and members, going back to the Constitution, restore, protect, and enhance, I believe providing funds to deal with emerald ash borer are protection. We need to speak for the trees here. We need to make sure that we are responding to this slow-moving crisis that is going to affect all of our districts. And a little bit of money for prevention would go a long way, and I would ask for your support.
Discussion to the 829 amendment. Discussion to the 829 amendment. Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge a red vote on this. The LCCMR spent money on the emerald ash borer already, and next year we have another half of the Lessard-Sams bill, and we certainly can try to get money for emerald ash borer next year. So I urge a red vote. We don't need to take any more money out of the 5%.
Call upon the member from St. Louis, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I urge a green vote on this amendment. We have a problem in Duluth of the emerald ash borer and our ash trees. We have a quarantine area, and now it has infected trees outside the quarantine area in a much loved Hartley Nature Center area that is used by our entire community. It's where we teach our children about the environment. They have a preschool there, and they have summer camps, and we really need to protect our trees. So I urge you to support this amendment and funding for this amendment. And I'm going to ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call being requested, and seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
For the members on the Ag Committee, you've heard me talk about this. I have a golf course, a big public park. 1.2 million people use it every year. Let me say that again. I have a golf course and a 300-acre public park within my district with 1.2 million people that use it every year. This is just about 700 acres of my district, a small farm size kind of deal. It has 8,000 trees on it. Over half of them will be affected by emerald ash. They will all be gone. The only ones that will be left are some really old oak trees and some newly planted oak trees and a couple of pine trees. Emerald ash borer is coming to a neighborhood near you. And I have a hard time picking on my friend Representative Gunther's bill. But we have not addressed this. Back when we had the Dutch elm disease, we poured $60, $70, $80, $90 million a year in today's inflation-adjusted dollars, statewide. This is a crisis coming to our state. Depends on whose estimate you're talking about. We have either 700 million or 1 billion ash trees in our state. They will all be dead. They will all be gone within the next decade. Now, this is not just a St. Paul or Minneapolis or 7-county metro area problem. It's a problem in the Southwest, the Southeast, the Northeast. It's every part of the state. And I think this is more of a symbolic amendment. Go into your districts and count the ash trees that are in your district and understand that each and every one of them will be gone. My city hasn't taken but maybe 5% of them out of our city, and we've already spent about $15 or $16 million. Think about that. This city where you work has spent $15 million, and we haven't even got to 5% of the problem yet. Multiply that by your districts. We need to start taking emerald ash borer seriously. This is a statewide problem, whether it's in a new suburb, an old suburb, a metro, or up on the range someplace. We got to put money into it. I'm going to support this amendment more as symbolic because it does not get to where we need to be. We've got to figure this out. Not as Republicans or Democrats, not as a House or Senate or governor. We've got to get together and figure this piece out. Because otherwise, we will have no trees or probably 2/3 less trees in our state. And we are a state of the North. We love our trees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Schultz would yield for a question.
She will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schultz, you talked about the Duluth area, and I just pulled up a map of the infestations so far in Minnesota with emerald ash borer. I'm wondering, so if we take state taxpayer money and send it to Duluth, what would you do with it?
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We would try to treat the ash trees. So my husband and I, we treated our ash trees, but not everybody has resources to do that. So we would treat our ash trees in Hartley Nature Center and wherever else it appears in the Duluth area, and hopefully take these funds and distribute them where we find it in other parts of the state.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Schultz. Would Representative Hansen yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, you're the author of this amendment. What are you going to do with the money? Are you going to save the ash trees?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Drazkowski, you know that we have to have a system of triage. So some of them may be treated using a pesticide. Some of them are going to have to be taken down. And that's really the chance for most of them. We're going to have to not repair and replace, but actually take down, and that has a cost. Part of the cost that Representative Mahoney was talking about is the cities are bearing that cost. So as the tree becomes infected, and it may be infected long before it's detected, it becomes, for lack of a better term, frail. And so you actually have a public hazard when the trees may fall down, impeding traffic, impeding power lines, or falling on houses. So part of the response is to get out there, do the monitoring, find the detection, detect the pest, and then either take it down or in some places do the treatments. Now, if you remember back, I think you and I are about the same age. We think back to Dutch elm disease, and you will still see some elm trees around Minnesota because there were certain areas where they were trying to protect them, and so they were treated. By providing a variety of options, and again, this is a relatively small appropriation. So when you have infestation like at Hartley, where there are a lot of ash trees around the north, getting in, taking them out, prevents that spread. So the choice of where you use those dollars is based on that rapid response model. And in Hartley, it may mean taking them all out or treating them, depending on the professional arborists that we have around the state. And I mean city arborists, I mean county arborists, I mean the private sector. They're all responding on this. They're all waiting, they're coming and pleading with us, give us something. And so this is a little bit of money to deal with the worst and to deal with the pest establishing a beachhead in area after area where we can respond with the tools that we have: treatment, take down, replace. Those options are there.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Representative Hansen, Representative Schultz, Representative Mahoney, these trees are going to die. And that's the cold, hard truth. And if we are going to be using state policy to further someone's pipe dream that they're going to save the trees, or Representative Hansen, prevent the spread of the emerald ash borer, that's not an approach that I want to be involved with, because that's a waste of money. Now, if we're going to use the money to provide an education program to say, homeowners, guess what? Your tree is going to die dead. And let them know the realities of what's going to happen and how to plan around it, and maybe plant some other trees, maybe some maples, maybe some bur oaks that aren't as susceptible to oak wilt, or maybe some cottonwoods, or, certainly black walnuts are always good trees until you get as far north as the Twin Cities and Duluth. But members, I think it's important as we set forward public policy in this area to be fiduciary stewards of the people's money. And it's also in our best interest and in the people of Minnesota's best interest to not mislead them to believe that something is going to happen that is not going to happen. These trees are going to die dead, as they have in every other area that's been infested by the emerald ash borer. If we go out there and use millions and millions and millions of dollars of the people's money to do an injection program thinking we're going to save these trees, when all it does is prolongs their life for another few years until they die dead, we're not doing a service to the people of the state of Minnesota. So, Representative Hansen, if there was more specificity in your amendment, if we were going to do a public education program, maybe buy some seedlings for people to replace the trees that are going to be dying, maybe buy them a chainsaw, some pieces of reality, I'd support the amendment. But if we are going to go off in a la-la land belief that we're going to somehow save somebody's trees that are mature trees that are going to die dead, we're not doing them a service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, Minnesotans, wow. So by that logic, we should have let the turkeys die because they were going to die anyway. Right? With the avian flu, they were going to die anyway. So we shouldn't have used public money to go kill the ones that were going to spread the flu. We shouldn't have done that. I guess we don't need to do health care because we're all going to die anyway. Stunning. I think there's a lot of Minnesotans that remember Dutch elm disease. Think back. Now, there's plenty that don't remember the elms. And in 2 or 3 generations, they may not remember the ash. But we know how to respond to diseases. We know how to respond to infestations. We know how to react, and we have good people who can do this. And I think the $2 million that we appropriated back in 2009 actually did delay the spread, because local units of government were able to go out and check their trees, those that received the money. So I don't think saving the trees is a pipe dream. I think it's something that Minnesotans value and treasure. And they're wanting us to do what we can to try to protect those trees. Now, because if we take the logic, if those trees are going to die, Representative Mahoney, your city's paying for them already, right? Somebody's going to pay for them. Somebody's going to pay for them to take them down. Or maybe the insurance companies have to pay for them when they fall on your car. So again, I would ask, I know there are a number of members who want to speak, but Minnesotans, listen very closely to what was just said. We need to vote for this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I rise in support of this. Back when I had just been elected a few years, maybe in 2007, I authored a forest protection plan bill that got through here to direct our state agencies to work with the forest experts at the Forest Resources Council and the U of M to put together a plan to respond to this, because we knew it was coming. And a lot of the experts said, it's 5, 10, maybe 15 years away. You know, those things don't fly very fast. And you know what? It was found in St. Paul 2 years later, because you know what? They hitchhike. They hitchhike on firewood. They hitchhike on commercially made wood products. And all of a sudden it was here. But we were better prepared because we'd gotten all the experts together to start to talk about how to be prepared and what would it mean and what is this like? It's like a forest fire in slow motion, but it's not like Dutch elm because these trees get incredibly brittle when they die. The elms were solid, strong trees, and they could stand for a while waiting for you to get the local money to deal with them. You didn't have to worry about them falling on people. These are hazard trees. They become hazard trees really quick. And you can't just leave them because they're going to end up on people's garages and homes and cars. And unfortunately, we had a situation in one of the suburban parks a few years ago where a tree fell on a person walking her dog. It wasn't this. It was another tree, hazard tree. But, I mean, there's real risks. It is also a huge part of the impact on our environment. And the Legacy Bill is about protecting and enhancing our habitat. If we lose 900 to 1 million trees across Minnesota, the highest concentration in the nation is in northeast Minnesota. We're going to have not only it spreading like wildfire if our communities don't step up, but we're going to have literally wildfires that are going to be very expensive to take care of and very threatening to people whose homes are in wooded areas with lots of black ash and green ash. They're not the decorative kind of trees that you see on the boulevards. I couldn't quick find the inventory, but most cities, because of our early work, have done an inventory of their city-owned trees along the boulevards, in their parks, and along their campus of their city hall or their county courthouse. In most communities, small and large, 20 to 30% of their tree cover is ash. It was the most popular tree to replace Dutch elm because it grew fast and it gave you shade fairly quickly, and it was affordable, and it held up to salt conditions along city streets and other kinds of environmental stresses. Our trees play a huge role, particularly in developed areas, in stormwater management. They're not just pretty. They actually make a difference in terms of what's going into those storm sewers that we have to deal with and the size of those storm sewers. This is a tiny amount of money, but it's going to help those communities that haven't experienced it yet figure out what to do, start putting together their plans, and that will make a difference. Because what has happened when we went through the many years of cuts in LGA and now the years of freezes in LGA, one of the things that was lost a lot of times was the city forester, whether that was someone under contract or that was someone on the payroll. And so there isn't really anyone in many communities who's got the background and expertise to deal with this. But when you start seeing a ton of dead trees in your community, the people want you to do something about it. And they want you to do something about it before it falls and hits their car or somebody or some other thing. And so it's important for us to step up. And this is just a small start, but I know it'll make a difference for those communities who are going to have their first infections and need some support.
The member from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I also rise to speak for the trees and speak in favor of Representative Hansen's amendment. I get to represent Egan. It's a really great honor. And one of the things that Egan has an amazing reputation for is our trees. We're home to 56 city parks. We're home to the largest park in Dakota County, Lebanon Hills. I know a lot of you guys spend time there in your off times, riding bike, riding horses, hiking. We're home to 161 trails, much of it along wooded roads. The symbol of our city is a tree. It's an oak tree, but it's a tree. Our community was one that actively replanted after the Dutch elm disease disaster. And we planted elm trees. And like a lot of communities across the state of Minnesota, about 60% of our forestry makeup is ash. I said elm, is ash. The other thing, since it's spring, that I have to mention, Twins won their home opener yesterday using ash bats. Ash is really important to the forestry and tourism and all the things that make Minnesota great. And Egan saw our first infestation of emerald ash borer in 2009. And I can't tell you what it felt like to get that news in a city where our trees are a huge part of who we are. It was really frightening. But our forestry service went to work, and they got a hold of resources, and they started treating trees. They started working with residents, making sure that our trees were being inspected, and that trees that were at risk were being treated, and that we had the ability to do that. And we treated our ash trees in our yard because our shade trees are so important to us. And the city has been really integral in making sure that we're protecting our trees, and we haven't had a new diagnosis of ash borer infestation since 2014. So despite Representative Joskowski's dire predictions of the dead, dead, dead trees that we are helpless against, science is working for us. Treatments exist, but the citizens of our communities need to understand how to protect their trees in their yard. Our cities need to be able to protect our open spaces that we worked hard to create in communities like Egan. And I invite you to come to our parks, and I invite you to sit in the shade and enjoy a concert at Capone Art Park, or hike in Lebanon Hills, and enjoy nature right here in the city, because my community has taken a stand and said we are going to protect our natural resources in our community, and that includes our trees. We can win the fight against emerald ash borer in Minnesota. It's our job as legislators to give our communities the tools to do that. So please support this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to agree with what's been said before, and also to remind many members, perhaps you had the people representing the golf courses come and meet with you. I did have that pleasure. There was a constituent that was part of that group, and one of the things they talked to me about was the importance of preserving and acting now to preserve the ash trees. So just like, you know, there's a lot of you that do have golf courses, and you know how important that is to our economy. And I got to say that again. It's an important to Minnesota economy. It's an important revenue that we have. So it's important to our cities and our livability. It's important to recruit people. I mean, are you going to go to the land of 10,000 lakes and tree stumps? No, no. That's not where you're moving, people. Your kids are leaving if that's what happens. So yes, this is an important issue. This is a priority issue. We need to start addressing it, and it is an issue that we can deal with. So vote green.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just in response to Representative Draz's, Drazkowski, I've got to get that right, comments. Here's what that $500,000 will do. The Minnesota Shade Tree Association came to the Ag Committee with a $10 million request. It combined taking out old trees or dead, dying trees, saving significant ash trees in certain areas. And their plan was something that my neighborhood actually came up with. I talked to the city last year about coming through the neighborhood and asking if people wanted their ash tree taken down while they were taking them down on the golf course and in the park. And they said, yeah, we can do that. We're going to take them down anyhow. But we're not going to grind the stump out, and we're not going to replace a tree. So the people in my neighborhood said, fine, come and take the tree down. We'll either get together and rent a stump grinder or have it taken out. And then we'll pay to put our own tree in, so long as it's within the 5 or 6 different trees. So if we get ahead of this, there will be people that will take care of their own so long as they get help from the state. This $500,000, this $500,000, quickly doing the math, I think it's 5% of what the Minnesota Shade Tree Association asked for to put this program together. We are one Minnesota. We try to do things where we can and try to put things together. And if we ask our neighbors, they'll pitch in. Now, I've got 5 pensioners, and not recent pensioners, that are living on fixed income in my neighborhood. And they're opposed, they're not going to participate. Yeah, I guess I'm a pensioner too. That's kind of nice. But I'm going to participate. And when they take the tree down this summer, I'll get the grinder out. I'll grind out that stump, and I'll plant a cherry tree or a maple tree or an oak tree or whatever tree it is that my wife okays. And I'll get a start, because hopefully some of the other people will decide to save their ash tree for a while. And my tree will be 20 feet tall by the time all the ash trees are gone. And Representative Hansen, I do remember the elms. And the street that I grew up on and I played on and played stickball on, or baseball, kickball, from June forward, it was like going down a dark tunnel, because it was covered side to side with shade from the elm trees. And for 20 years, that street was hot as a pistol because it didn't have any shade after the elm trees. If we get ahead of this, our small towns, our big cities, will have shade on their streets. Maybe not tunneled, not like they had when we were growing up, but we'll still have trees. If we don't, we'll have hot deserts on our streets.
Further discussion to the A29 amendment. Representative Frankie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hansen yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Frankie.
Representative Hansen, I know I had signed on to a bill appropriating some money for EAB. Could you please just enlighten me on what happened to that bill?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Frankie. And I don't see Representative Hamilton on the floor. We actually had 2 bills that I introduced, and they were heard in the Agricultural Committee.
Representative Frankie.
Will Representative Hansen yield for another question, please?
He will yield.
Representative
Frankie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, did those bills move forward or not?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Frankie, no, that's why we're here today, and I've got another one for tomorrow.
Representative Frankie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Just checking.
Further discussion. Seeing none, a roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There There being 73 ayes and 58 nays, the A29 amendment is adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A32.
I call upon the member of the author of the amendment, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there's a A34 secondary amendment.
Clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Hansen is moving to amend his amendment to House File Number 707, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A34.
Call upon the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, thank you on that last vote. And I think I did that without Representative Freiberg speaking on that one. So members, and those of you who were here last year, you may remember I did a similar amendment, and this relates to an old appropriation that is in my area in northern Dakota County. It's an outdoor heritage appropriation, and if you may remember, last year Representative McNamara actually took the amendment. And that amendment was, at that time, to take the unspent dollars, which are about $3.3 million, if the project wasn't done, and allocate it at that time to the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. This year, I am reappropriating those dollars with the secondary amendment to Emerald Ash Borer. Now, we just appropriated some dollars to Emerald Ash Borer. This amendment, I think it's important to know what happened to the last amendment. The amendment that was passed a year ago. In conference committee, that was changed to give the landowner and Dakota County one more year to work out their differences. That year started on July 1st. It's now the beginning of April, and this project has not been completed. I've talked with Dakota County. I am hopeful that this amendment would send a message both to the landowner and to the county to get this project done. I don't think it's a good idea if on June 29th we're looking and this project isn't completed and $3.3 million cancels back to the fund. We heard about the importance of dealing with Emerald Ash Borer. But I'm going to withdraw this amendment and the primary amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that this project will get completed. But if it doesn't, and if it falls apart, well, we're still here during the legislative session. I would hope to come back again.
Representative Hansen withdraws his amendments. There are no more amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 707, as amended.
Third reading, as amended. Discussion to the bill, as amended. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. In some ways, this is deja vu all over again. You know, I chaired the Legacy Committee for 4 years and went through the joy, pain, and agony of presenting my bill on the House floor. For those who are new to this, one time I went 6 hours, one time I went 5 hours, and both times we had to come back and do it in special session. And so it has quite a legacy. But I don't think that Representative Gunther is going to have near that problem today. This is a fine bill. He's done an excellent job putting it together and addressing a lot of the needs that the people of Minnesota and our members have expressed. But with that, just have a few words that I would like to expound upon. And that is the gratitude that I do have for the people of Minnesota who in the time of a great recession chose to go to the polls in 2008 and raise their own taxes to pay to dedicate money into 4 funds for the good of the state of Minnesota. With 56% of the vote, like it or not, the people of Minnesota voted for this amendment and made it law. Recent polls show that 75% of the people of Minnesota endorse and support what the Legacy Amendment is doing. 75% like what's happening with the Legacy Amendment. It touches everyone, as Representative Murphy was saying. The historical societies, the State Arts Board, the local arts board, libraries, hunters, fishermen, our lakes, our boaters, all benefit. Let me digress into history just a little. The first park in Minnesota was established, Representative Gruenhagen, in his and my district in Hutchinson. Later, a United States president, a Republican, Theodore Roosevelt, began the national park system. 6 parks established by a Republican, Theodore Roosevelt. Parks and trails are important to the people of Minnesota. They bring great benefit to greater Minnesota in the form of tourism and economic gain. Representative Davids could talk about what happens in his district with trails. The Legacy Amendment is one of the best things that the people of Minnesota have done for themselves. And it's time that we embrace what they've done. And so once again, I commend Representative Gunther for the bill he's put together and urge a green vote.
The member from Kuchiching, Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I will be voting for this bill. There's things in it I like, a lot of things I like. There's some that I don't like. But I just want to acknowledge a group. There's some orange-hatted folks up in the gallery that are watching this. And the sportsmen and women in the state of Minnesota had a great deal of work to get this amendment passed. And so the projects that are in there that affect hunting and fishing are very important to my district and very important to me. Thank you.
Member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, real quick, some of the comments made sometimes or you should live up here, or if you lived up there you would realize I did live up in Representative Eklund's district in Kuchiching County for 20 years, worked there, cut wood there, put all 3 of my kids through school there, and if it wasn't for the public land, I don't know if Northome, the little town of 312 people that I lived in, would survive. The public land made a lot of timber for the loggers up there. The public land furnished a lot of area for the deer and bear hunters. When I first went up there, the town turned into a virtual big city from 312 people to I don't know how many. And the bear season, deer season, grouse season have brought money into the local economy. Without that public land, if it would have been private and posted, would have been nearly the same. And I'm going to support the bill today, and I'm glad to. Just wished we could do more, actually. And I would like, if the conservative type amendments come in, I would like them to apply to the area that specifically where these people are from instead of my area, because I worry about them affecting what we do in the southern area where there's not a lot of public land. So I'll be voting for the bill. Thank you.
Representative Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was really pleased this year to be able to serve as vice chair of the Legacy Committee under the chairmanship of Representative Gunther, and there's a couple of reasons that I really like this bill, and I just wanted to share that with you, with the body today. First and foremost, the Legacy money is dedicated money. It's not money that that we need to have targets for. The target is the sales tax that's collected. It's there for us. But more than that, Chair Gunther has established a decorum and an atmosphere in the committee that is very much bipartisan. And so I found this to be a really welcoming environment and kind of setting a really good tone for the legislature. All voices were welcome. We all felt we had an equal voice. And you might have noticed today on the floor when Chair Gunther presented his bill, it wasn't just Chair Gunther, and in fact, it wasn't just the majority members, it was the majority and the minority. I think it's the first time I've seen our friends across the aisle be part of presenting a bill. And so I think that speaks highly of how Chair Gunther has operated the committee. The second reason I like the Legacy bill and why I'm supporting it is because I found as a rural member that this Legacy money allows many of the rich resources in the metro area to go to the rural areas. I found that many of the grants that we made in the arts and cultural area in particular allowed the museums, allowed the orchestras, allowed artists and others to go and extend their services and their abilities to help rural schools and rural communities where they wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. So I'm really pleased, and I would urge a green vote today on this Legacy bill. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to say thank you to Representative Gunther for including a provision that I worked on that creates an art app for people to use if it's developed, if it's included at the end of session, to learn about art all across the state of Minnesota. It is a small idea with a big, powerful punch. There's a woman I met named Amy Demmer. Amy Demmer runs the art colony in Grand Marais. She's a part of a group that I was a part of back in 2015 called Next Generation. Next Generation was a group of people from across the state of Minnesota talking about rural art, economic development, and placemaking. And when I think about the hard debate that we're having in Minnesota about geography, that group of people that came together around an idea of building community. And Amy Demmer had this great idea about this app, and I'm excited that it's included. I was in New London about 3 weeks ago, and I met with a woman named Kristen Allen. She runs the Groundwater Garage and Gallery. It's a small gallery built in what used to be a gas station in that community. And it is a place where largely women are coming together and using art to build their community. And what I have seen in the work that I've done over the last couple of years is people in communities across the state of Minnesota using art, all forms of art, to build connections and strengthening their community. And when I think about what ails us in Minnesota and what we talk about when we think about the divisions around geography, these people in all of these communities across the state of Minnesota they're the answer. They are building the communities across the state of Minnesota, and they want to show us the good that they're creating in their communities. And largely, they reject the idea that we're divided on geography. They're proud of what they're building in their communities, and they want people to see it. And the art app that is included in this Legacy bill is one more way for people from all over the state and really the country to learn quickly and easily where we can find art in the state of Minnesota and how it brings us together and how it bridges our divides. So I want to thank the chair for including it. I think it is a really important idea. It's a small one, but a good one for our future. And I'll be voting for your bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I came here today with the expectation I would probably vote against the bill, but I guess there's always optimism and a cause for hope. I think before we talk about that cause for hope, I do want to just point out to Representative Gunther one provision that I think is challenging, and that is the dollars that come from the Clean Water Fund to the general fund to go to soil and water conservation districts. And Representative Gunther, you know I support soil and water conservation districts. I was a supervisor for many years. I know the folks around the state. But even they say they don't want the clean water money. They want the general fund dollars. Because that clean water money has a purpose to protect, restore, and enhance water. And the way that money was distributed last time was $100,000 to each soil and water district for administrative costs. Not that administrative costs aren't important, but I don't believe they're constitutional. And so I would ask you and ask the members of the conference committee when this leaves here to take a look at that. And this isn't an issue of supplant or substitution that we always have. It's an issue of, is that an eligible use for the clean water dollars? And it ties back to the debate we had on the Environment Finance Bill. And that Environment Finance Bill, we had a cut because the $22 million that had been in the general fund in the base were covered by the clean water dollars that are in this bill to soil and water conservation districts. I think I also need to bring up a little bit of history and remembering back to a former member who was chastised in the newspaper again and again and again for taking some dollars off the bottom line and for the Outdoor Heritage Fund. And this does actually change the Outdoor Heritage Fund. It changes recommendations. It changes those appropriations. Now, I agree with the one that we just got, and we did that in public testimony. But I think there's been a difference in how there's been a reaction to changing the council's recommendations. And I think it's important to point out that difference. I think what we did just here as the people's representatives to actually have an open debate like we should on many things and come together with a vote, which frankly surprised me, is a model for what we could do the rest of the session. So Representative Gunther, I'm going to vote for the bill, and I'm going to put my faith in you and the conference committee that those provisions that were just passed will be carried and fought strongly for. Those two provisions that I had. The other ones not so much, but those two provisions I would hope would continue. And I think at some point we have to take that risk of working together to make these things work. There's work to be done on this bill. Not so much on the parks and trails or the arts, but I think the interaction between the Clean Water Fund, the Outdoor Heritage Fund, bonding bill, if it ever comes, and the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. There's work to be done there, and I would look forward to working with you. I doubt if I'd be on the conference committee, but I think we have a good relationship to actually talk about these items.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think we're about there. And I think it was interesting. Erdahl kind of got up and kind of said, Representative Erdahl, sorry, sir, some of the things. But I think those numbers are so important that people are reminded that this passed by 56% of the Minnesota voters. But even more importantly is that, you know, when we hear some of the bad things maybe, or, you know, with different things, debate about what, you know, if we're buying stuff and some of the different things, but there's 70% approval rating right now around the state of what's going on in all these funds. And, you know, I asked to be on this committee. I just, you know, a lot of you people do education stuff and you do transportation, and I care about those issues too. But, you know, I love these issues, and I just think they're so important for the fabric of Minnesota and across the board. You know, the arts, you know, we don't talk about what that brings to the state and quality of life and why people choose, and then the history stuff and the trails, I mean, around the state. And it was interesting to hear the vice chair say about come on out and use our trails and you know, leave some money and then go home, I think she said. No, she didn't say it quite that way. But, you know, it really is a vital fabric of Minnesota. There's some great things we didn't even talk about. Detmer got some Veterans Park thing and Veterans Voices. You know, we're going to record Vietnam veterans. I mean, there's some amazing things in this bill. If you can't win an election on this bill, you guys are pretty darn poor politicians. If you can't find something to take credit for across the aisle, every one of us, my goodness, it'd just be shocking to me whether it, you know, the water and Lessard. There's a lot of neat and good positive projects all over the state that are being done, and you know, the arts money goes all over, and there's trail money going all over. So I mean, I could write your lit, you know, if you need some help, because there's some good stuff that you could do. You know, I happen to serve on Lessard that I mentioned, and you know. In this bill, we are tweaking it, and then, you know, the council really did look at things thoroughly and studied them. And, you know, I was teasing Chair Torkelson because the Lessard got tweaked pretty heavy, and so did Clean Water. So I was kind of teasing him. I said, how do you face your council members? Because me on Lessard, I'll tell you, I don't want to go back and say, well, you know, some of what we're doing here. So I'm hoping in conference committee that Chair Gunther can kind of move back off of some of those things, to be honest. But I asked him, and anyways, he can defend himself. But I kind of teased him. I said, well, my people have guns and stuff, and his people can kind of just throw water, I guess, or something. But I don't know. I think he'd have a hard time going back to defend some of that. Chair Gunther's been great to work with and his staff, and there's stuff. There's some really great provisions in here, and thank you for that, Chair Gunther. There's some really nice projects across both parties, and maybe he'll talk about those in his wrap-up, or maybe he wants to get home. He's trying to beat Erdahl, because Erdahl took hours, I think, maybe even a couple of years. But you know, like I said, I just love this stuff, and for me, it's a quality of life. I try to get outside, and I think we all should. You know, we're in this building and quite a bit, and it is quite unhealthy at times. There's studies about it, and you know, so there is something to be said about moving around from our chairs once in a while. But you know, I try to, during the summer, you'll probably laugh, I try to fish almost every day, and I really don't even care if I catch anything necessarily, but it's very therapeutic, and I recommend that you consider it. I think I'm going to put some money in and buy Drazkowski a bicycle. So I don't know what color his favorite color is, but I want to see him out there on the trails. And then I was wondering if the Chair Gunther would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Lilly.
So there's, I'm going to break some House rule here. So I wonder if there's anything in this bill that might be important, you know, maybe to the chairman. Perhaps, are we doing anything in southern Minnesota, anything in Blue Earth that might be important to the people of Minnesota, Mr. Chair?
Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Lilly, yeah, you got it. The Green Giant Museum in Blue Earth is a place to see. They have people from 50-some countries stopped there last year to see the Jolly Green Giant and the Little Sprout. And the gas station had so much mold they couldn't use it anymore, so we have to build a new museum. So it's going to be great. I hope that stays in there all the way through Conference Committee.
Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Gunther. I would encourage you to vote green on this, and sorry, and try to support. Apparently, the Chair Gunther has Representative Erdahl says he has a nickname, Little Sprout, but we'll pitch in. Please vote green.
Member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. I wish I had a prop like that. It's very nice, Representative Lilly. My name was mentioned. I thought I should get up. I just think it's very important for all of us to remember that the work we do here is the final say on these expenditures, that the councils that do fine work, and I appreciate all the work they do, especially the Clean Water Council, but there are times, and there have been many times through the years, that the legislature has made adjustments to the recommendations from these councils. I'm sure it's not been easy for me to make these changes, but the conditions are such that these changes need to be made, and I hope you all remember that the legislature has the final say. Thank you.
The member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you. Please vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.